That's good. Let's do it.
That's it. Let's go for it, guys.
Let's go for it. And thanks
right,
again for doing it.
Here we are, everybody. Here we are, our first comprehensive career interview that we're now doing. We are calling this Suspense Video, and of course, this is Suspense Radio, and we're now putting it to video. And we couldn't think of a better person than, of course, author Jeffery Deaver to be the first one to do a comprehensive interview of his entire career. Now, Jeff, welcome. And this is the first time you've actually done an interview to span your entire career, correct?
That is absolutely correct. Generally, when I do interviews, it's things like, well, obviously for a book tour, it may have to do with a specific theme, outlining, which I suspect we'll get to at a point, character development, setting and so forth. But spanning an entire career, no, that has not happened. And I hope you've got a lot, I was going to say tape, but they don't do that anymore. I hope you have a lot of pixels or space, because I've been doing this for, oh my God, I've been writing full-time now for about 40 years.
Yeah. Well, it started in 1988, but we actually want to go a little bit before that, because we would like to know, now, Manhattan is My Beat, which came out in 1988, which was part of the Rune trilogy. That was the first book that actually was published by you. But how did that book get published? Tell us about that journey going from being a lawyer to now saying, hey, From Russia with Love is my favorite novel, which kind of started you off as a little kid. So let's just get right into that.
Well, John, the little kid part is quite relevant here, because I knew at a young age that I wanted to be a full-time writer, and a full-time writer of commercial fiction. And I'll kind of explain how that came about. I was a nerd when I was growing up, but I was a nerd when, a nerd meant something. Nowadays, you're a nerd, you've got $1 billion stock option in a social networking platform. You're a geek, but all the beautiful girls go to you. I was like a Leave It to Beaver nerd. Now, you guys are young. I don't know if you know that TV show, but it was a sitcom about kind of a nerdy young boy. Well, I said that once at a conference, and this young girl came up to me afterwards, and she said, "Mr. Deaver, I'm rather angry with you. Justin Bieber is not a nerd." Well, I said, ask your grandparents about the Leave It to Beaver show. But my point is simply that I didn't have any talent for sports. The cheerleaders and pom-pom girls ignored me, but none of that mattered, because I sat in the Glen Ellen, Illinois Public Library after school and on weekends, and I read and read and read. And what did I read? It wasn't Proust, I'll be honest with you. It was commercial fiction. John D. MacDonald, Ian Fleming that you referred to, Raymond Chandler, Dashiell Hammett, and Lord of the Rings, fantasy as well.
Oh, yeah.
And C.S. Lewis. But I knew then I wanted to be a writer, but I also had the insight that writers were not prodigies, that you have to live a certain time in order to have something to write about. Jackson Pollock was spilling paint on canvas when he was 4, I assume. Mozart, I know, was composing it quite young. Yeah. That's not the way writers work. We need to put stuff into us before we can put stuff out. And so I knew I wanted to write. I wrote a lot of poetry for a while. I wrote angst-ridden, absolutely terrible short stories in high school. I was editor of the literary magazine in high school. I kept writing short stories, but knew I wasn't ready for a novel. I studied other careers. I have a journalism degree from Missouri. I have a law degree from Fordham, but always in the back of my mind was, when I can break out, I'm going to go and become a full-time commercial novelist. So as I kept writing my stories at night, little outline ideas, and practicing law during the day, I kept thinking, maybe I'm getting closer and closer. And finally, it was the mid to late 80s before I felt I was comfortable enough to submit a book, and that became, that was Manhattan is My Beat, which to my surprise was an Edgar nomination. And that kind of told me that, yes, I can do this. And I went on from there, and it's been a book, at least a book a year ever since.
Yeah.
Well, before we talk about the Rune trilogy, I'm curious, you have a story about an unpublishable manuscript. And I'm wondering if you could tell that story.
I will, but to protect, and being a former attorney, I guess you're never really a former attorney.
True.
I'm a recovering attorney, let's put it that way.
You're in LA, Laws Anonymous, yeah.
Right, I said lawyers. Oh, that's very good. I will not mention the book, nor the publisher, because guess what? The publisher and the individual about whom I'm about to speak are still around. I had I'd written a novel that I thought was the end all and be all of all novels. It was a murder mystery. And I submitted it back in the days, and I guess some of your viewers are going to know what a self-addressed stamped envelope is. That's the big 8.5 or 11 by 14 envelope that contains your manuscript that you're sending to an agent or a publisher, along with a self-addressed stamped envelope that the publisher could then either send you back several things. One would be like a bag of gold and a contract for your next 10 books, or more likely your manuscript back with a pithy, erudite critique about why it wasn't quite right for them. Well, this manuscript I sent out, absolutely proud of it. And I remember 2 rejections. One was that I got the manuscript back in the self-addressed stamped envelope, no gold, no contracts. And it was the manuscript, and it had obviously fallen on the floor of the, probably the mail room. I don't know that it ever got to an editor. And the pages were all jumbled. And this was in the days when you could smoke in offices. It still had maybe a cigarette butt or ash all over it. And in lieu of the pithy, erudite editorial letter, which I mentioned a moment ago, this had my own letter to the editor or agent, it was a publisher, turned upside down with a footprint on it. And I think probably it was dropped accidentally and just stuffed back in the envelope and sent to me. They may actually have drawn straws to see who got to stomp on this thing, but whether that happened or not, I don't know. But the unpublishable thing, the manuscript also went to someone else, another editor, and I was awaiting the pithy, erudite, I belabor it, but self-addressed stamped envelope editorial letter. And it came back, and this was not jumbled. And I opened up the manuscript, waiting to be like Grasshopper on the Kung Fu movie. I was humble. I was going to find out how I could write better. And the letter said, "Dear Mr. Deaver, thank you for your submission. This novel is unpublishable. Very truly yours." And I had several reactions. One was elated joy because it was really a typed letter back in the days of typewriters.
Yeah,
and I know that because I turned it over and I rubbed my hand kind of pathetically over
feel the typewriter.
Was that?
You could feel the typewriter.
I could feel the typewriter, and I was just somebody had gone to the trouble to write this. And then I read the lines, "Thank you for your submission and very truly yours." And I took that as encouragement to keep writing. I was a bit of a Candide fellow. Well, now the coda to the story is this. The book didn't go anywhere. I put it on a shelf, forgot about it. And then I sent out other manuscripts, and lo and behold, something happened and I got published. And my first book was published, then another book was published, and I did a multi-book contract. Well, I was still working as an attorney at the time, and I was in a bind. I told myself, if I'm going to write full time, I'm going to treat this as seriously as if it were any other business, which it is. And that meant never missing a deadline. But a deadline was approaching and I was not going to make it. I needed another 2 weeks to finish the manuscript I was working on that I would then submit to the second or third book in my contract to satisfy that. And I thought, what am I going to do? Now, being the clever lawyer that I was, the tactical attorney, I thought, I've got a cunning plan. And I thought I would take the unpublishable manuscript, put a new title on it, send it off. It would, of course, be read by my editor over the course of a month, something like that. Sure. And he or she, notice that was very subtle, he or she would then respond that, "I'm sorry, Jeff, this just isn't for us. Do you have anything else?" Miraculously, I would then pull out the manuscript I had finished in that time and hand it over. And you can guess that I got a letter in return that said basically, Jeff, the best thing you've ever written. We accept the manuscript. And the reason I want to maintain some anonymity is it was a different editor, but it was the same publishing company that called it unpublishable.
Wow, that's hilarious.
Wow.
But you know, but the one thing that that you mentioned in there that I want people to reiterate is that you said, I'm going to make this a business. And we keep telling people that you can't make this a hobby. You have to make this a business if you want to be successful. Hobby's not going to happen.
That's absolutely true. Yeah, now, when I teach my courses in writing, I tell my students, you can approach this however you want. There are some authors that labor away, enjoyably, I hope, for 10 years and write the one novel that's within them. And it can be, it could be a Nobel a winner. It could be a National Book Award winner. That's one type of writing life. And that, of course, tends to be, it could be a mystery, it could be a thriller, but it tends to be more David Foster Wallace kind of books, Saul Bellow kind of books, Jeffrey Archer sort of books, Martin Amis type of books, I meant to say, British, thinking of British writers, literary books. And those are absolutely wonderful things to do. That's not what I want to do. And I think that's not what most people who focus on genre writing want to do. They want to produce a product, and don't hesitate to call it a product. It is a product.
It is.
We make literary toothpaste. That's all there is to it. And you have to approach it that way.
Yeah. But you're funny because your story also sounds like if the movie Funny Farm with Chevy Chase, because he did the same thing, except it was his wife's manuscript that he sent in.
I remember that. That was a hilarious film.
Yeah, and you're probably like, I know how that works. So then you said, okay, your first book again, Manhattan is My Beat, but let's go into the entire Room trilogy on its own, because then book 2 was Death of a Blue Movie Star, and then Hard News. So talked about the Room trilogy. Talk about the creation of. Did you know it was going to be a trilogy first of all when you started with Manhattan is My Beat?
I knew it would be a limited series, largely because my first 6 books were murder mysteries. And I'm sure this is well known to our audience, but some of you may not have heard it. I define those 2 categories in this way. A murder mystery asks the question, what happened, in past tense? Who killed Father Jones behind the rectory? And the Agatha Christie, the Hercule Poirot get on the case, and they solve that. And it's intellectually fascinating. It's a puzzle. There's some tension along the way, maybe a little risk to the hero. But a thriller asks the question, what is going to happen? And that is a driving story in which pick a frequency, every 2 chapters, every 3 chapters, there is a potential cataclysm that has to be averted or not averted. And that all leads to the big climactic scene at the end, where ideally the hero solves the crime and prevents what terrible thing is going to happen. Well, my first books were murder mysteries, and the Rune character is a very fascinating person. And it was written in response. Actually, to be honest with you, I was rather offended by a movie I saw, and I can't remember what it was. This goes back to the 1980s, kind of like a French New Wave film, kind of pre-Luc Besson, although maybe he was doing films then. I think it was by an American filmmaker, and it portrayed New York as evil, dark, gritty, certainly, and the characters who populated the story were just singularly unpleasant. And there was some crime involved. And I took offense at that because I was living in Manhattan at the time. And certainly it had a higher crime rate than it does now, but it was the most magnificent city on earth. The song in Hamilton, we're living in the greatest city in the world. Well, that was true about New York. And so I wanted to create a heroine who mirrored the heroine in this earlier earlier movie I had seen, and yet who was courageous, quirky, spunky, dogged, had a sense of humor, and approached New York with with the vision of what an astonishing place this is, and I want to get to the bottom of things that are happening here. And so Manhattan is My Beat was a story about a young woman nicknamed Rune. She had another name, but that's what she called herself. And she worked in a video store. Remember video stores?
I do.
And she notes that an older older patron rented the same movie over and over and over again. And the title was Manhattan is My Beat. And it was a noir film, gritty black and white noir film from, I think, the 1950s. And he is murdered. And he still has the video in his VCR when he's murdered. And her boss, kind of a pig, says, Rune, go get the tape. That's worth $75. Nowadays, VHS tapes are, a dime a dozen, but back then it was expensive. And she goes and she's horrified to see her friend killed. And she gets the idea that his murder was because of the video he rented over and over again. And she becomes an amateur detective. And I will say, I think, as I mentioned before, I think we'll talk about outlining a little bit later.
Yeah.
But the story meandered a bit, but I will say it, like every single book I've written since then, had a big twist or two at the end. So I got the idea for the twist. It was a murder mystery, wrote it, and then moved on from there.
Well, in between, so you did the 3 Rune books, and then you started with John Pelham. Mm-hmm. But after your first John Pelham, which we'll go back to in a second, you did a legal thriller. Right. And most attorneys that I know
come out of the gate legally.
They write legal thrillers, and that's all they do. This was really your only one. Could you talk about Mistress of Justice?
Sure. Mistress of Justice is, I guess, technically not a legal thriller in the sense that the machinations of the plot have very little to do with a case or a business deal. It has to do with a murder in a law firm. And so it is a murder mystery in a way, although it has thriller elements in it because there's some nefarious force out there targeting our heroine, Taylor Lockwood. And she becomes she's a paralegal at the firm, and she becomes a private eye to try to figure out what happened. And again, nothing is quite what it seems to be. In that book, I kind of spread my wings a bit and learned about subplots. The Rune stories and the Pelham stories, while not first person, were very close third person. So we did spend time with other characters occasionally, but mostly we were in their heads. Now, Mistress of Justice jumps from one character to another. All the stories are intertwined, and again comes down to a big twist at the end. And then I don't have the dates exactly. I guess then I went back and did the second and third John Pelham books. Those also were more classic murder mysteries as well.
Yeah, because you did, Shallow Graves was 92, and then Bloody River Blues was 93. But then John Pelham took a little break and didn't come back until 2001. Because 97, you had a little character called Lincoln Rhyme that you decided to bring out. But
that one, yes.
Yeah, that guy. But sit into outlining. Was that something that you did from the beginning because you are very, very detailed in your outlines, or was that something that you've crafted over time with your novels? Get into your outlining process.
I'm going to spend a little time on this, and as you can tell, I'm rather verbose in answer to some of your simple questions. But I think this is important because I know there are published writers there who may or may not be interested in this, but there's some beginning writers, and I think it's important to give outlining its due. I'll first of all tell you how I outline. I spend 8 months outlining a book before I write a single word of the prose. My outlines invariably are 120 to 150 pages, sometimes a little longer, sometimes a little less. They detail every single aspect of the plot, all the characters, when they enter the story, when they leave the story, either horizontally or vertically. Horizontally, if they don't survive a run-in with the villain. I know where all the clues are seated in. My books are move very quickly. The books I've been writing for the last 25 years, they move very quickly. They take place over about 2 days. And if I don't outline, the stories just don't work. It's, if you ever saw the TV show 24, you know how tightly that was put together. My books are the same way. And so I need to outline to make sure that at 8:05 p.m., the killer is here. And at 9:10 p.m., the hero is here, and they're going to coincide. So I do that. And the other thing is I like my surprises and twists and turns. And in order to make that work, what I need to do is to make sure the clues are seeded into the story fairly. And so that when we get to the end, and I have like 3 surprise endings in my novels, generally just 1 in a short story, but 3 in the novels. We get to the second twist, big surprise, and the reader goes, chapter 3, he mentioned Fred Jones, but he told me that Fred Jones was actually a fishmonger. And, but he is a fishmonger, even though he had a very deft way of using a knife, an unusual way of using a knife. So maybe he could have been the killer after all. And I didn't think about that. So I need to do that with the outlining process. Now, that's what my outlines are. And I adhere to Joyce Carol Oates' comment, and I'm paraphrasing here a bit, but I think she said something to the effect that you cannot write your first sentence until you know what the last sentence is. And that's the way I write. I have to get everything planned out ahead of time. And I am going to belabor this just a little bit more because I feel it's so important. The outlining lets you see the structure of the story. It's up on a big wall. Use Post-it notes. And you can see that you've got a scene here and a scene here. And oh, that can't work. These are 2 like emotional scenes where the lovers, 2 sets of lovers are talking about their personal life. That doesn't work. We've got to move one elsewhere. Put a killing in between that. Get some excitement in between that. Because all books are about structure as much as they are about fine prose. And I would take a well-structured book over a literary, flowery, stylistic book any day. Well, that's one reason. But the big reason for outlining is that ask yourself, have you ever read a book that should not have been written? Have you? Yes. And why does that happen? Because somebody sits down with a great idea, a set piece beginning, and starts to write, and then has no idea where the story is going to go, and gets to 200 pages in and realizes there's no story, there's no middle, there's no ending. And what does one do then? Well, I've done this courageously. You throw the whole thing out, which I have done. And I've also done the cowardly thing. And that is to stick in a cliche-ridden middle and a Deus Ex Machina ending and put it out in the stream of commerce. And that's a disservice to the people that we need to revere the most, the readers. So anyway, that's my 2 cents on outlining. To be very specific about how I started to outline, it was a commercial factor. My first books, although I got 2 Edgar nominations, did not sell particularly well. And I went back and I reread them. And this is the Rune books and the Pelham books and Mistress of Justice. And I said, well, there's a reason they don't sell well. They weren't particularly scintillating. They weren't that good. And why weren't they that good? Because the story meandered, I digressed, I gave away the surprises. I never gave away a twist ending, but I kind of anticipated a reversal. And so readers would say, somebody got into a car and he thinks, or I as a narrator say, and he would never make it to New Jersey. He would never know that he wouldn't make it to New Jersey alive. Well, I've just given away that he's going to die. Why? That was stupid. So so here's what I did. I outlined my first 7 books, scene by scene. I looked at that outline. And then when I moved on to another publisher and I got the rights back, either because they were out of print or I bought the rights back, I rewrote them. I rewrote those 7 books.
Wow.
The 7 books that you see now are not the 7 books that came out in 88, 89. And I've taken a lot of flack for that. There's some authors who say, no, once you've done it, it's there. That's the your work embodied in this incarnate form of a paperback original or a hardcover in the case of Mistress of Justice and Hard News. And I thought, no, it's our duty to get the best book we can. And of course, since then, I've sold far more copies of those books, mostly because I've made a bit of a name for myself. And back then, nobody had heard of me. And so those books have sold better. I can't say that they sold better because of the outline, but I will tell you that I know people have enjoyed them more because of the outlining. So when I learned that, I said, well, wait a minute. Why not outline first? why write a book and then go back and outline it? So from then on, I think the book was Praying for Sleep. I outlined, and I've been outlining ever since.
Nice.
What made you want to jump from writing mysteries to writing thrillers?
I have I guess I'll put it this way. There are two answers to that. I am ambitious. I want to reach as many readers as I possibly can. Now, in terms of success, I'll be very frank. As far as income goes, as long as I'm able to pay my bills and write, I'm happy. End of story. That's it. That's what it's always been about. But I also have enough of an ego to think that I write the type of book that people will enjoy. And I know that from fan letters. I mean, my books are, they're a little complicated, that you can't just sit down with this book and, read it and read a couple pages, then come back to it. They're roller coasters. You sign on for the Deaver ride. Some people don't care for that, but that's the kind of book that I like. And so I thought readers would like that too. And murder mysteries, well, you can read a few pages of Rune, just like you can read a few pages of Agatha Christie or Poirot or Dashiell Hammett or Raymond Chandler at night, and then put the book down and pick it up again the next day. That's great. But I wanted this, to grab people by the guts. I don't want somebody to finish a Deaver book and say, oh, that was interesting. I want them to say, oh my God, I survived that book and I missed a subway stop and showed up late for work because I was so compelled by the story. And that's what thrillers do. And it's all about the continual questioning of what is going to happen in the plot. My idea of story, I don't have it in front of me, but for my course, I'm going to try to give you an approximation of it. Okay. My idea of a story is an emotionally engaging work of fiction populated by realistic characters, both good and bad, a story containing conflict and questions with some frequency, all of those conflicts and questions are ultimately concluded or resolved at the end to the reader's satisfaction, which doesn't mean a happy ending, but it means to the reader's satisfaction. We don't need, I tend to write happy endings. I prefer them, but it doesn't have to be a happy ending. Well-known TV show, and I don't want to give anything away, but those who haven't seen it might not know about a high school science teacher who was a meth dealer. Did it have a happy ending? Not exactly, but was perhaps the most satisfying ending of certainly any TV show? Yes. So that's what thrillers do. Conflict, question, to drive the story along as fast as you possibly can. Mm-hmm.
So let's dive into the Pelham series here real quick. So again, Shallow Graves was 92, and then you had Bloody River Blues in 93, and then took a little bit of time off and to decide to come back with him in Hell's Kitchen in 2001. So let's talk about John Pelham. Let's talk about those books before we get into Mr. Rhyme. Sure.
I've always loved the itinerant hero. Look at Shane, Alan Ladd Jr., of course, wonderful story. And for those of you who don't know him, this is a cowboy, a gunslinger. The movie was the 1950s. The story set post-Civil War West. I don't remember what state. And he comes to town, stranger rides into town, gets embroiled in a warfare between the ranchers and the cattle baron. It's a standard fare for cowboy writing, but I just loved the way this character the strong, silent fellow came to town, utterly ethical in one sense, and yet was still a gunslinger and had kind of a dark history about him. And then he moved on to something else. Well, what did he move on to? Other stories. What a great vehicle for telling a murder mystery kind of thing. Well, and John Pelham, by the way, was a movie director, indie film director in the I guess it was set around the 1990s. Mm-hmm. And he had an incident in his past and served a little jail time because of that, disgraced, but still loved films and came back into the industry as a location scout. And these are folks, as the name suggests, who travel around the country. They're itinerant. They work for or are independent contractors of a film studio, and they look for locations in which to shoot films. And it's a real profession. I also found it kind of fascinating. And so John Pelham, who has as an ancestor, Wild Bill Hickok, the gunslinger, although the books are, of course, set in the modern time. And he has kind of an edge to him. He's not going to be bullied by anybody. He's not going to let anybody get away with anything illegal. And so I have him in a trilogy of stories where he does just that. He gets involved and saves somebody, exposes a terrible crime that's going on, and is an all-around hero. And then he gets in his Winnebago and goes elsewhere. Well, there was one flaw with the series. And it actually is kind of bifurcated. So it's one flaw, but it had two aspects to it. Mm-hmm. One is that Hollywood, as a subject to write about, can lend itself to pastiche and, frankly, a bit of silliness. Now, Day of the Locust, nothing silly about that. The Player was kind of funny in some ways, even though it involved the murder of a screenwriter, and what producer hasn't wanted to at some point. True. But still, when you set your story in Hollywood, Get Shorty, for instance, both the TV version, the epic version, which I love, absolutely wonderful series, or the John Travolta film, also great, and the Elmore Leonard novel, wonderful. When you put your characters and your story in that world, it's kind of a wink, wink, nod, nod, and we know there's going to be silliness, there's going to be excess, there's going to be ego. There's going to be drugs and doing bad, nefarious things, but at the end of the day, it can be kind of a joke. Well, that was one problem, and the other problem was that John Pelham had to go to a location on a job and coincidentally discover a crime, and it was always a question of, well, could he go to like Chicago, and there was the old Sam Giancana, Al Capone mafia. There's still a little element of that there. Would he go there to make a movie and get involved with the mafia? Even that's a coincidence. So the series was limited. Now, let me just say, and I guess I can sneak in a little, we'll probably get to it, we can sneak in a little self-promotion here. He was the genesis for John Colter, my present series, because what does John Colter do? He gets in his Winnebago, has a gun on his hip, travels around the country. But why does he travel around the country? Because he is specifically looking for rewards that have been offered for escaped convicts, missing criminals, and missing persons as well. So I took the Hollywood element out. I have the fact that we know he's going to confront a legitimate challenge and criminal elements, even if it's a civil reward offered for a missing child or spouse because they're missing for some reason. And so Colter Shaw is the heir to John Pelham.
Nice.
I love
the
that.
Remastered. We'll call him the remastered version.
Remastered version. Excellent. Okay.
The remastered version.
So I will say that I discovered you when Maton's Grave came out. I got an advanced copy of it, and I read it, and I went, "Oh my God! I've got to find everything this guy's ever written." I absolutely love this book. And talk a bit about the story behind Maton's Grave, and also it was made into a film. It was your first project made into a film, and James Garner played it, but they changed it to Dead Silence. And I got to say, for the longest time, I didn't realize it was the same story. It's like, wait, that's the same thing? What? So could you talk a bit about that?
Sure. My books are thrillers. That's what they're there for. Sweaty Palm. I think Samuel Goldwyn said, if you want to send a message, go to Western Union. I don't preach in my books, but the experience of a book is enhanced if you sometimes look at longer or larger issues. My book, The Broken Window, was about the implications of data mining, for instance. Right. My book, The Burning Wire, was about the fragility of the power grid, which is astonishingly fragile. And I got this idea that I was fascinated with the way people communicate to each other. And that, in a way, sounds like the death knell for a thriller. But I thought, what if I had two characters who have to communicate and yet cannot communicate by traditional means? And somehow, and you can ask me as much as you want where the ideas come from, I have no answer for that. They're just there. Yeah, I'm very, very lucky in that regard. The ideas come. The idea came, what about a man who talks for a living? Okay, I'll explain that in just a moment. Okay. And what about, turned out to be a woman who could not talk, who was hearing impaired, severely hearing impaired. And yet they have to communicate. And why does my male character have to talk? Because he's a hostage negotiator, and that is all about talking. So from there, I just made up the story. I just came up with a busload of school children from a school for the deaf. The school bus is hijacked, and a hostage situation occurs, and they have to talk to each other, communicate with each other to save the children. And they both do that. They both contribute their own unique skills to that. And yes, it was bought by, I think it was Interscope, aired on HBO, still airs. I mean, they did a good job. James Garner, Marlene Matlin, Lolita Davidovich was in it, a couple other actors whose name escapes me now. But they did a very good job. And so, and I just heard, we heard from an English-French film company. They do very classy films over there. I like European cinema, much of it. And they're trying to do everybody's talking about doing a remake over there. So we'll see what happens.
Oh, nice, cool.
May I tell you a funny story though about?
Yes.
Okay, very briefly. I was on a book tour in Dubai, appearing at the Dubai the Emirates Literary Festival. And as part of that, part of the festival, we authors were invited to lecture about writing at generally a high school, some colleges, but generally high schools there, like American universities there, or American schools there. And so I went to a very large school, very nice school. And I was, they printed up my CV for the kids to look at. And they saw what I'd done. And I guess this was after The Bone Collector. I'm sure, it was definitely after The Bone Collector. And so I'm getting these admiring eyes looking at me from the audience. The boys and girls were just, oh, look at the celebrity up there. And I'm thinking it's The Bone Collector. And then I'm in line to sign books. And these kids, generally, book queues to buy your latest, they can be somewhat lengthy, but generally you've got 15, 20, 25 people at something like this. I must have had 50 teenagers in line. And I'm signing the book. And this was, they actually were not available. I think I was signing my current book, one of the Lincoln Rhyme books, but it didn't matter. I'm signing. And finally, this girl comes up to me and she's got her little friends clustered around her. And she said, "Oh, Mr. Deaver, we just loved Dead Silence. Could you tell us how you decided to make the doll with the knife live underneath the stairs so it could grab the legs of the people walking down the stairs?" And I'm thinking, okay. And then it occurs to me, there was a horror film that came out after the HBO thing called Dead Silence about, yes, a creepy Chuck or Chucky kind of style doll that lived underneath the stairs, and people would come down and he'd grab their foot and then, And so, well, I was faced with a moral dilemma here because all the kids were asking about this. I was faced with a moral dilemma. One was, I'm selling a ton of books, I mean, let's face it.
Yeah.
But actually, what was that going to pay my mortgage? No. But what would have happened was I would have disillusioned those kids if I'd said, "Oh no, that's not me. That's somebody else." So as far as they know, I'm still the doll with the knife guy.
I'm glad you liked my movie.
Exactly. That's awesome. That's classic, and that happens all the time. I know that we interviewed Mark Greaney, and he talked about going out and people would come up to him and say, "Oh my gosh, Mr. Clancy, you changed my life with so-and-so book." And he's like, no. I'm the other guy on the cover. I'm not that guy. Tom's dead. So yeah, but, and that's the thing. And then you just see that. But so then after Maiden's Grave, you decided, I'm going to create this quadriplegic NYPD detective that is incredibly intelligent in Lincoln Rhyme. So, and then The Bone Collector comes out. Mm-hmm. Now, talk a little bit about the character creation, of course, of Lincoln and Amelia, and then into The Bone Collector, because that was one of those things like all of a sudden you jump from having Pelham, from having the Rune trilogy to now into Lincoln Rhyme, the character that has now propelled you from 97 pretty much through to 2021.
Mm-hmm. Well, again, always, I'm like a sponge, always looking for ideas, thinking about ideas. And part of that concept is themes. And I think The Bone Collector had its genesis, oddly, once again, in a film I had seen. And I don't remember which one, but it was a action adventure film. Take your typical, it may or may not have been one of theirs, but Bruce Willis, Tom Cruise. And who doesn't love these films? Big explosions, all kinds of exciting stuff going on. And they're just so much fun. But you get to the end, and usually we've got the hero who's had the what beat out of him by, generally it's the uber villain who is a famous, sometimes Shakespearean actor doing a star turn. Philip Seymour Hoffman, Jeremy Irons, and they're not martial artists, but it's in the script. So they're picking up, I'll pick Tom Cruise, and they throw him into a big rack of glass beakers because it takes place on the top of a mountain and right on the seashore, because the bus has to kind of fall off the mountain at some point. And it's clear that under other circumstances, the villain has bested our hero and he's going to die under any other circumstances. But just at that right moment, suddenly the hero, who's bloody and down and battered, has a recovered memory that his father, who he had a dispute with all his life, actually taught him to kickbox when he was 5 years old. And this comes back to him now. And he leaps up and he kickboxes the bad guy and saves the day. And the bad guy falls over the cliff and he's holding on by a rope. And Tom Cruise would try to save him, but then he doesn't. So it's all a satisfying ending. Well, come on. Was there ever any doubt that the hero was going to remember that memory? Or maybe he hit a gun earlier and he finds the gun taped up under the table. And we kind of yawn at that. Well, what if we had a hero who actually had to be pure mind, who was not able to recover a kickboxing memory, who was not able to grab the hidden gun, who had to outthink the villain? And the first idea was that this was somebody a la Sherlock Holmes, because I was just going to say, yeah, Conan Doyle was a big influence on me. So the forensic stuff and also the intellect stuff and kind of the curmudgeon stuff as well. And he originally was going to be taped up, duct tape, and in a like a cellar. And he had to somehow outthink the villain, that guy who was ambulatory, and come up with some thoughts. I didn't have any idea. as to what. And then I thought, no, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to make him a paraplegic being paralyzed from the waist down. And then I thought, no, you know what? I'm going to make it a challenge for me and for him. I'm going to make him a quadriplegic, paralyzed from the neck down. And I thought, well, it's going to be a challenge. And I created Lincoln Rhyme, and he had all those qualities: curmudgeonliness, heroicism. Certainly, nothing was going to stop him from getting to the truth, and great forensic knowledge, and his inability to, shoot the bad guy. Because even Sherlock Holmes engaged in fisticuffs, and he carried a Wembley pistol with him. I mean, he fired off a few shots, and so and that was Lincoln Rhyme. Now, did I ever think the book would be more than a one-off? No, I never did. I didn't know. I created a realistic character, and he was very well received by the disabled community. But I never thought that people would like him, so I had no plans for another book. And so out it came, and and here's some advice to you aspiring writers out there: when you get a call from your agent who says Denzel Washington wants to star in your movie, is it okay? Say yes. and it took off from there. And I get asked all the time, why is he so popular? For one thing, he is heroic. There's no question about that. He and Amelia, now married, at the time they were, I guess you'd say, dating, or professional partners always, but now married. They have a unique relationship. They're both flawed in some ways, and they are clearly not your stereotypical glamorous thriller, either thriller novel or thriller film couple. And yet they're real. And people have told me that kind of describes their marriage, minus the disability. It's just a very realistic thing. But I think ultimately the answer is that we are all in some way on the disabled spectrum. I mean, I've had some nerve issues, some nerve damage issues. That kind of puts me here. And then there are people who have, worse issues, and people who still may not be exactly who they want to be physically. Maybe they're taller than they want to be, shorter than they want to be. And yet, whatever it is, we all are, first of all, our hearts, our minds, our spirits, and our morals. And that's who Lincoln Rhyme really is. So it's very philosophical. It might be a little out there, but I think if there's anything that explains why he has been so popular, and he is indeed popular. In fact, just before I jumped on this, I was working on the next Lincoln Rhyme book that will be out in, let's see, I have to get this straight. Will be out in November. I've done 2 books this year. November of 2021, called The Midnight.
That's the Midnight Lock, right? The
Midnight Lock, exactly. Yeah, and so and then I'm already outlining, and I'm actually writing a short story that will accompany that. But the short story introduces the Lincoln Rhyme thriller for 2 years from now. So, but Lincoln will be around. Don't worry. Not killing him off. Don't worry.
Well, the thing I like about Lincoln, and you mentioned it, is that he has to use his smarts, and you don't have that weapon of convenience where, like you said, you're walking through and you're like, God, I wish I really had a machete now. And all of a sudden it's like Excalibur out of the lake, and then she hands it to you and you're like, oh my God, thank you so much. So yeah, I like it when the characters have to think more than anything. That's why I like, Perot and Marples and Holmes. Yeah. Those characters have to think. They have to use their brain.
Yeah, and people respond to that, I think. Yeah. And then that gives me the opportunity to have Lincoln Rhyme do something that serves one purpose. It's a legitimate purpose in chapter 17. And he does something that addresses a question in chapter 17. But in fact, the same thing he does is the grand explanation for the big twist in chapter 81. So that, again, the reader says, in chapter 17, he ordered dinner, but it was odd because he ordered sardines, and he never has sardines, but he ordered sardines. And then chapter 81, anybody out there listening to that, don't use this as a clue. It would not work. But so he gets sardines in chapter 70. And then in the end, chapter 81, he had not got the sardines to eat them. He'd gotten them because he had an odd clue of two fish bones that he'd never seen before. And he suspected they were sardines. And that led to his uncovering the villain. Well, that's how I can use Lincoln's brain to, I hope, excite the reader so that they say, "Oh my God, that's fun." My books really are. Well, they're novels, they're thrillers. They use their language, well, English here and in the UK and many other languages around the world, and people recognize them as books. And they fall into any category at first. They are books, but you know what they really are? They are illusionist acts. They're acts. They're magic shows. I don't write about the sociology of crime, the terrible things that happen on the streets. If I write about politics in policing, it's because it serves my purpose of telling a story. And it's this kind of intellectual, I guess I'd say, tactics. This intellectual tactical approach to writing, that is what my books are. So if you want, a real look at life on the streets, go to The Wire, for instance. That's not what I do, nor is that what I want to do. I want people to get on a roller coaster or sit down in Vegas in front of David Blaine, David Copperfield, or some of the wonderful magicians now, and just sit back, kind of let suspend your disbelief a little bit, because I kind of punched the envelope of some of twists and turns and surprises. But you're gonna get something fun out of it.
Mm-hmm.
After the second novel, which featured Lincoln Rhyme with Victor, you came out with, and I have to be honest with you, first of all, I've read all of your books, so I'm gonna get that out there right now. You came out with I picked up Devil's Teardrop, and I read what it was about, and I thought, how can you make this topic interesting, let alone make it a thriller? And I have to tell you, it's personally in my top 3 of all of your books.
Oh, well,
I love Devil's Teardrop. And they also made a TV movie about it as well. Could you talk about Devil's Teardrop?
Sure. Again, the concept came to me. I think I had probably read something about the profession of document examination. It's both civilian, private document examiners, and then it's a part of all police departments. And maybe not the smaller police departments, but all state police units have and the FBI certainly has a document examination operation. And now document examination is not reading, it's not graphoanalysis. It's not reading a letter and deducing things about the writer. Most law enforcement people think that's pretty bogus. You can deduce if the pen goes through the paper, they were probably angry when they wrote that. Or if the letters were incredibly sloppy, they may have been drunk or on drugs when they wrote that. But document examination is really about comparing handwriting, finding forgeries, but also examining the paper itself for trace and so forth. And I just got the idea that I wanted to write a book about a document examiner. Well, that was the theme again. I'm talking about what might be a valid thriller to write about. Documents, how on earth can I do this? Well, it occurred to me that, obviously, what I need to do is to have a nefarious killer prowling the streets of New York. I'm sorry, this was said in Washington, that's right. The streets of Washington, D.C., as we are approaching the millennium, December 31st, 1999. And he has a gun and he's going to be guilty of mass shootings. And the only way to figure out what he's up to and who he is to stop him is a single letter, a letter of threat that was to be delivered by the man who had enlisted this killer, the man having died. And they have no clues as to who he is, what he was up to, and they don't know who his shooter is. And the shooter had some brain injury. So all he knows is that every hour until midnight, he's supposed to go kill people. And so, all hands on board. And Parker Kincaid, my retired document examiner, FBI document examiner, is hauled back in to try to figure out what's going on. And he, well, I can't tell you whether he does or he doesn't because I'm a suspense writer. But that was the story. That a single document that propelled the story along.
Talk about the movie they made.
Yeah, the movie was good. It was on Lifetime, and the thing I liked about it was, now, of course, the television movies now are superb. I mean, it is beyond belief the quality and the variety of films that are on. I watch, of course, a lot of Netflix. I see things on iTunes. I see things on Amazon Prime, and I'm almost afraid to go to their homepage because there'll be 7 new shows, and I don't know which one I pick.
Exactly.
And it's kind of intimidating. And also, I'm very busy. I work, every day. And Game of Thrones, I'm sorry, I'm sure it's wonderful. That's 80 hours of my life right there that I can just not afford to lose.
It's a lot, isn't it?
The Queen's Gambit. Well, okay, that was what, 7 episodes? Well worth it, of course.
Yeah.
Well
Breaking Bad was the exception. Breaking Bad was the exception. I devoured that. I binged it. Probably my favorite show on television. But anyway, there's the cable shows, and then there are the network shows, and there may be like the light. I call it the light cable shows. I mean, I don't know if Lifetime is. They do wonderful things. I just don't know if that's you can get that terrestrial or not. I think probably not. But what I liked about the Lifetime version was that it was almost euphemistic in a way, and it focused on the characters. It didn't have big set pieces of machine guns, bodies sprawled all over the place. And had that been, maybe an HBO film or an Amazon Prime original, no holds barred, language goes, any language goes, it might have been a little grittier. And I don't know that we needed that, but that was, it was a very fun film.
Now, kind of going right to the Bone Collector, since we're sitting on TV movies, NBC just did the TV movies with Lincoln Rhyme, and you had a mini series that happened with that. So is Lincoln one of the only characters really to be on movies and TV? Because I'm sitting here in my brain and I'm trying to think how many other characters have kind of done those jumps in this genre.
Sure. Has Harry Bosch, Michael Connelly has had movies made, and of course Bosch, but I don't know that he's had a Harry Bosch movie made, has he?
No, I don't think he has.
No. Okay.
Lee Child only had Jack Reacher in movies. Alex Cross has only been in movies.
Right. But I think Lee is doing TV though now.
Yeah, it's coming. Yeah, so he'll be. But Lincoln is one of those characters that, I mean, movie, TV, and then NBC did the miniseries. Now, was that miniseries supposed to just be the Bone Collector story, but just much more expanded?
Well, I think so. Because
I watched it, I thought it was great. And
I thought
it was like, oh, this. I was wondering what they were thinking when they conceptually wanted to do this.
Yeah, I thought it was well done too, but it wasn't my story, and I have no problem with that. I mean, I have movies and books are apples and oranges. I have never wanted to be involved in the making of a movie adaptation of one of my books. I've written some scripts, and I've enjoyed that. Nothing's been produced yet, but that's a different kettle of fish. I was happy when they wanted to make it. I think of Don Westlake when he had the wonderful writer. Oh, how many? What, he wrote 200 books under various names, and let's say a non-felicitous version of one of his books had appeared on the silver screen. Mm-hmm. It was not particularly good, and a reporter went to his office to interview him. Much as we're talking now, and the reporter said, "Well, Mr. Westlake, really, what do you think about what Hollywood has done to your books?" And Westlake, who was kind of a larger-than-life, very funny fellow, got this shocked look on his face, and he spun around in his chair and looked up at the shelves where he had copies of all of his books, and he turned back and he said, "Oh, man, you scared me. Hollywood hasn't done anything to my books. They're still there," which is true. And, if I'm very cynical when an author says, "They took my baby, they stole my vision, Hollywood destroyed it." And you know, my response is, so when did you send the check back in protest? Come on, give me a break. Readers, you know, readers know the difference. And if there's a bad movie, well, so what? Who cares? You're still going to get paid for it. And if anything, you're going to get more sympathy than anything else. And so I really distanced myself from the process. I thought the movie was good. I think the TV show was very, very different.
Yeah, I loved them both.
It was quite interesting. Yeah, I thought it was very, very well done. And of course, TV, they always hope for a second season, and that didn't happen. I wasn't quite sure how they would carry that out. I mean,
I was wondering that too.
Excuse me, if I had done it, I would simply have called the series Lincoln Rhyme, and you could go from there, make anything. But the Bone Collector, I think, you know, possibly it's marketing. I'm a businessman, you know, it's marketing. I understand that. Maybe the Bone Collector they thought would be a bigger draw, but well done. The acting was great.
Yeah.
I want to jump a couple of years ahead here because you did 3 Lincoln Rhymes. You did a couple standalones as well. I want to ask you about Garden of Beasts because that was not only standalone, it was also historical. So you sort of went out of your wheelhouse, per se. Could you talk about Garden of Beasts?
And I believe in an interview, you said that was the one book you wanted people to remember you the most by.
It's my favorite book.
It's in my top 3. Definitely.
Oh, thank you. And I'll tell you what that book came out of, 9/11, September 11th attacks. In this sense, I, again, don't want to write political thrillers. I don't have an axe to grind, but a book is enhanced, the reader's experience is enhanced, and we do have a responsibility, I think, as authors, even in genre, to look at important issues, and to make people think, and not, you know, lecture, never do that, but just make them think. And so after September 11th, I decided I wanted to write a book about systematized, institutionalized terror and evil. And it is I still think it's way too soon to write about September 11th, even after, 20 years coming up now. Yeah. And as someone who lived through it, and I was not in New York at the time, although I had been to Windows on the World on top of one of the towers about a month before, and my law firm was kitty corner from that, and I lost people in the collapse of the building, and so I couldn't do that. I would have been too
well. And let me say real quick, I was telling John while your signal went out that I was at the time doing interviews for the Seattle Post-Intelligencer, and you were coming into town on your book tour, and you were kind enough to let me interview you for that piece. And that was one of my first interviews I ever did. And it was such a thrill to talk to you. Huh. And you actually later said you really appreciated what I'd written, and you inspired me. So thank you for that.
Oh my gosh, that means so much to me because we're all in this crazy world together. The book writing and book publishing world and interviewing world. And don't we really feel, I love television. I mean, you can broadcast this if you want, I don't care. But, don't we all love television? Yes, we love movies. We love video games. But I think the most enduring form of creative entertainment is a book or short story, because we are participants in the creation of the vision. We, the readers, are participants. You sit back and watch a TV show, as good as it is, it's passive. You play a video game, you're just trying to shoot the aliens. And it's actually fairly passive. You may have to think strategically a little bit. You go to a, art museum, and, frankly, after 15 minutes, you're thinking of where are we going to go to eat afterwards. And so, but a book.
Glad my wife's not in here to hear that one.
So, anyway, but I appreciate your words. That means a lot to me. Okay, well, we can let the question stand, and then you can do a jump cut or something, and I'll just continue talking about Garden of Beasts itself. Okay? And
please.
That's a good stopping point, because then we're able to kind of get, because we still have, there's still many. I mean, as far as your awards and As the World Turns and many other kinds of things. So yeah. Actually, so luckily you weren't in here when Jeffrey said what he said, but that was good.
Mr. Deaver might be in trouble.
Yeah, have you never met my wife?
You met at Voucher Con
well, so there's Shannon who did the book.
Hi, it's nice to meet you again. I think we had a drink at a bar in Long Beach a few years back.
Hey. Oh, a drink in a bar in Long Beach. No, that couldn't have been me.
Right. It could have been an author.
Yeah. So awesome. So why don't so we'll go ahead and we'll stop it now and we can go, and Jeff and I and we'll do our cut up because I'm just learning iMovie, so you're going to help me and we'll do this up.
Well, now talk about Garden of Beasts though, please. Finish talking about Garden of Beasts.
We'll do that, then we'll cut it there. Also, I will say I'll be home next week, so we can use the I was
just going to ask what your dates were.
I can use the high-speed router there. We won't have a problem.
Okay.
So I'll just pick up from, well, I'll tell you where Garden of Beasts came from, September 11th. And by that, I mean, I was very moved by the occurrence, as many people were. It was somewhat close to me. I was not in New York when it happened, but I lived in New York for 20 years. I had been at Windows on the World on the top of one of the towers just a month before, and my law firm was kitty corner from the towers, and I lost friends and had friends injured in the attack. And when it happened, what would my reaction naturally be? Well, I'm a writer, so we writers always filter events through the lens of how can we, if we choose to, create, in my case, a written work that could do justification, that could do justice to the event. Now, William Wordsworth, I think, said, when you want to write about, I'm paraphrasing here, of course, poetry is emotion, but it's emotion recollected in tranquility, meaning you have a big breakup and naturally you want to sit down and write a poem about it. And the poem is going to be awful. What you have to do is let time go by, absorb what happened, get some perspective on it. And I decided that I wanted to write something about not the 9/11 attacks themselves, but about institutionalized evil, because I thought that was a very valid thing to consider, and could also make a compelling book that would draw readers in and make them experience what institutionalized evil can do. I didn't want to write about fundamentalist terrorism. I found that my opinion was that the narrow-minded, foolish 19 who hijacked those airplanes, there was nothing compelling about them. They were petty, they were indoctrinated, and that was not the kind of act that I wanted to write about. I wanted something that was utterly pernicious, that affected not only a small group of people, but maybe all of us, or had the potential to affect all of us. And so I decided to set the book in a different era. And who were some of the great evil dictators who came to mind? Of course, there's Pol Pot. I didn't think that would have resonance for a broad Western audience. There was Stalin, certainly, but Stalin was certainly perhaps the most institutionalized dictator of all time. But he was basically a thug, just a pure thug. The one who I found the most pernicious, if I may use the word again, and the most insidious evil force in history was, in recent history, was Adolf Hitler. Sure. And so I slowly came up with the idea of Garden of Beasts. Garden of Beasts, by the way, is a translation of Tiergarten, the park in the middle of Berlin. Garden of Beasts refers to the zoo. There was another zoo, but it was the hunting grounds of the royal family many, many years ago. But also Garden of Beasts, I like my titles to do double duty. So what did this mean? It referred to the country of Germany, which was in many ways reeling from the Treaty of Versailles, which subjugated the people, put them at a great disadvantage. It punished them as opposed to punishing the powers that be during World War I. And you know, the country, otherwise beautiful, full of culture and nice people, Hitler turned them largely into beasts, bullied them, and so we had this astonishing movement that could not have happened under other circumstances. But you know what? It did, and if it did once, maybe it could happen again. Story is very simple. I create my hero, good guy, bad guy, anti-hero in a way, Paul Schumann, who was a hitman for the mafia in New York. He killed, yes, but he killed only bad guys, killed other mafia people. That was still wrong. And he was caught, sent to Sing Sing, the prison on the Hudson River in New York, and given an ultimatum. You'll die, a gas chamber or electric chair, I don't remember which, or you can go over to Germany under the auspices of the 1936 Olympics. You'll be a journalist, pretending to be a journalist, an undercover agent working for the American security agencies. And there you will assassinate the man who is Hitler's rearmament czar. Because, and this is historically true, in 1936, we had no doubt that Hitler was rearming. We did not know about the Holocaust or Kristallnacht or his plans at that point, although there was certainly some suspicion. But we knew he was going to present a danger to Western Europe and certainly take the Alsace-Lorraine back and other disputed regions, the Sudetenland, present-day Czechoslovakia or Czech Republic. And so we knew he was going to do that by combat. And so I created a fictional character, Reinhard Ernst, who was a kind of a compilation of Donitz and Rader and some of the other real-life individuals who were helping Hitler rearm. Why did I make him fictional? Because I thought only Frederick Forsyth could get away with creating a novel about the assassination of Charles de Gaulle and the Day of the Jackal, and get away with it because we know de Gaulle survived. So I wanted to create a fictional character who my hero, Schumann, could actually assassinate. And then I threw them in together. Paul goes over to Germany, and suddenly what happens, here's the bad guy, Paul Schumann, and supposedly the badder guy, Ernst, who Schumann learns is a good grandfather. He hates the Nazis. He wants to go back to the Republic, the German Republic. He wants to oust Hitler, but here's his job. And again, being a suspense writer, I have to let the plot go at that. But I will say I worked harder on that book than any other. And I think and it took me 2 years to write. Usually I write a book a year. All the research, it took me that long. Yeah. But I think it really stands up as I think it stands up to novels of both that genre and novels of that theme fairly well.
I would agree. Yeah.
I agree. Yeah. So everybody, this is going to conclude part 1 of our Jeffery Deaver interview, because we got a lot more Lincoln Rhyme, Colter Shaw, Catherine Dance, As the World Turns. We got a whole bunch more stuff coming. So we're going to
October list.
Part 2. Yeah.
All right. Well, gentlemen, I cannot thank you enough. This has been just a pure delight, and we'll